I know America's youth. I believe in them. We can be proud that they are better educated, more committed, more passionately driven by conscience than any generation in our history.
In the midst of the Vietnam War, President Richard Nixon encountered heavy scrutinization upon announcing his plan for the United States invasion of Cambodia, thus widening the scope of the war. Nixon's proposal ignited flames in the hearts of citizens across the nation, notably at Kent State University, where an encounter between avid student activists and the National Guard erupted into violence. Images of the disturbing events at the once peaceful university spread instantaneously, fully revealing the schism the Vietnam War had created between many American people and the actions of their government. But to fully understand the tragic events that took place on May 4, 1970, we must first take a look back into the 1950s, so let's rewind. Beginning in 1954, when President Dwight D. Eisenhower was in office, Vietnam was undergoing its own turmoil. As the Battle of Dien Bien Phu ensued, Vietnam's boundaries were altered tremendously as the North and South split at the 17th parallel. Soon following, November 1st of 1955, the Vietnam War began 2 decades of both international conflict and domestic social movements advocating peace. As the Vietnam War unfolded, in 1956, Eisenhower's domino theory surfaced as a proponent against communism, claiming that if one Asian nation fell under the influence, then all of them were bound to succumb to communist forces. This theory was passed down into the presidency of John F. Kennedy, as he was elected in the year of 1960. As JFK came into office, corruption in South Vietnam began further weakening its already unstable government, and soon Kennedy increased American troops, reaching over 16,000 in number by 1963. Following Kennedy's assassination, Lyndon B. Johnson held America in his palms as he took a landslide victory in the election of 1964. Johnson continued JFK's trend of heightened presence in Vietnam territories, quickly authorizing the bombing of northern Vietnam. By the end of 1967, over 500,000 U.S. soldiers were fighting against the communist regime. At the dawn of 1968, the Tet Offensive took precedent as the North Vietnamese communists began launching a series of attacks against their southern enemies, spurring a decline in American public support for the war effort. Soon following, Johnson announced his unexpected withdrawal from running for an anticipated second term. By November, the presidency shifted into the hands of Richard Nixon as he took the nation in a Republican victory. Upon Nixon's election, he introduced to the public a theory of peace with honor, where he proposed a role of the United States to uphold peace while maintaining their integrity and authority as a superpower nation. Starting in 1969, the Selective Service System conducted a draft lottery calling upon all men born between 1944 and 1950 to fight for the United States in the Vietnam War. Many people protested this call, being against involvement in Vietnam.
And I and several other of my classmates would stand in front of the post office in Kalamazoo, Michigan every Wednesday in protest of the war. And it was a silent vigil. We held up signs, "Stop the war, bring our boys home." Every day we were there. There was a man claimed he was with a merchant marine who took pictures of us, said they were just for a scrapbook. Well, it was the same 8 or 10 people every Wednesday, so we knew he was sent by the government, but we didn't care. We stuck to our conviction.
Since the late 1960s, tireless peace protesting movements spurred from a passion against violence, spreading rapidly across the nation.
To protect our men who are in Vietnam, and to guarantee the continued success of our withdrawal and Vietnamization programs, I have concluded that the time has come for action.
And on April 30th, 1970, the day that unknowingly determined the fate of Kent State University, Nixon announced the United States' plan to invade Cambodia. His proposition, spurred partially from hopes to end the war in Vietnam, was intended to prevent North Vietnamese underground tunnels from reaching South Vietnam, therefore stunting the growth of communism. This triggered backlash across the nation, and already a conflict between the common people and the federal government began to arise, soon to hit Kent State. On May 1st, 1970, students at Kent State University began to organize a crowd of protesters, starting on campus and moving towards the town to protest Nixon's decision to invade Cambodia. By then, a widely evaded dusk-to-dawn curfew had been put in place as public fear of chaos escalated. On May 2nd, conservative Governor James Rhodes of Ohio, dreading anarchy, called in National Guardsmen, who made their first appearance on campus. That evening, rioting students set the ROTC building on fire, infuriating Rhodes and shocking the public. By the next morning, May 3rd, the Guard flooded the grounds as tension climaxed.
I think that we're up against the strongest, well-trained, militant, revolutionary group that has ever assembled in America.
And it was on May 4th, 1970, only 4 days after students began their open outcry against violence, that the Vietnam War was brought home. Shots rang out, echoing across the nation. Over 2,000 students gathered at the Commons to protest the presence of the National Guard, and when the Guardsmen opened fire, it marked a day in history that Kent State and America would never forget. Nearly 80 Guardsmen were standing on the hill ready to fire, and in 13 eternally life-changing seconds, 28 of those Guardsmen fired, half of them aiming directly into the crowd of young activists, taking the lives of 4 students, 2 in the middle of protesting, Allison Krauss and Jeffrey Miller, and 2 bystanders, Sandra Schroyer and William Knox Schroeder. Aside from the 4, 9 students were injured, left with physical and emotional scars that haunt them to this day. On that fateful day, no one believed the National Guard would actually open fire on the youth, an action that left the nation terrified.
There's no reason for the Guard to move against the students. First of all, students weren't moving against the Guard. Secondly, students would have left for classes.
Kent State was closed for 5 days after May 4th, during which journalists swarmed the scene. Across the nation, graphic footage was released informing the public of the occurrences. Almost immediately, Life magazine picked up the news, using a heart-wrenching photo as its cover, a famous Pulitzer Prize-winning picture that gives chills to viewers to this day. Even without the internet, news of the tragedy spread rapidly, alerting citizens and further fueling the national anti-war protest. Immediately following, a majority of the public believed the students had brought the shooting upon themselves.
Yes, because they were warned and they knew what was happening and they should have moved out.
Although this was not the beginning of the protest movement, the response to the 4 dead was global, making headlines across the country. People were horrified, for this was the first rally that ended in death, with the blood being on the hands of the federal government. Only 11 days after the events at Kent State conspired, 2 students were killed at Jackson State in response to their demonstrations. Shortly after hearing the news, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young sprang to the studio, writing and recording their famous song, Ohio, reaching 14th on U.S. Billboard's Top 20. The artists conveyed a compelling message of federal brutality as they sing, "10 Soldiers and Nixon Coming." Although it was not Nixon's order to call upon the Guard, the lyrics implied that the people of America were standing alone against the government, who was responsible for taking the lives of innocent students. Following the May 4th events, the National Guard and federal government as a whole was forced to re-examine crowd control methods to prevent such atrocities from occurring again. Yet, as we face our modern and increasingly rash society, various movements, whether violent or peaceful, are often deemed radical due to their controversial messages. Even still, political campaigning for and against Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump have erupted into violence where pro-Trump supporters turn vicious against bystanding protesters, calling for aggressive law enforcement and crowd control. Even peaceful rallies fighting conservative measures, including pro-choice protests against Indiana Governor Mike Pence's abortion restrictions, turn violent when the government and the people become divided, parallel to the events at Kent State. Today, Kent State is remembered as the university that firsthand experienced the horrors of the Vietnam War. Even still, the case of the National Guard's open firing is greatly debated, many standing by the belief that the federal decision was unjust. The heartbreaking day of May 4th, 1970 revolutionized the way most citizens view peace protesting today, opening a vault that holds the horrors of modern brutality and immoral federal actions against the public. Graphic propaganda, even without access to the internet, spread rapidly, delivering the gut-wrenching news to citizens of America and people across the world. The tragedies at Kent State, though precious lives were lost, helped open the eyes of the global public, shedding light on the need for peace, exposing abominations of unjust federal actions, and revealing how impactful the human passion can be.